Hello and welcome to the 6th instalment of INGames with me, Spike, and Andy. We've got a really cool show this week. We're opening up Pandora's box. For anyone who works in the games industry, you'll know that we're talking about esports, and we have three of probably the best and most knowledgeable people, that we could get on the show this afternoon, but probably in the business, and that is Anna Baumann, Ralph Reichart, and Odie. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you so much. It would be great if you wouldn't mind, Anna, starting with you, just saying hello and talking a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Spike. So my name is Anna. I've been working in esports for a couple of years now. By trade, I'm a lawyer. So I actually started out in esports, building my own legal practice a couple of years ago, advised mostly players, really at this, infant state of the industry, promoting good standards, helping especially, the weaker parts like the players. And now I've transitioned into a different role a year and a half ago. Now I'm managing director and general counsel of Rogue Sports Europe. That's actually the European part of Team Rogue. I'm managing the LEC team, and that's a lot of fun. As you know, we're playing today a game, so I'm quite nervous and excited at the same time.
Thanks for taking some time out of cheering on the team to talk to us. Ralph. I think you're muted, Ralph. How can we not hear you?
He's muted himself somehow.
Or maybe not. Maybe Odie, why don't you go while Ralph sorts out his headset?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Michael O'Dell. Everyone knows me as Odie. I've been in esports for 21 years. Started off as a player, turned into a coach, into a team owner, manager. I sold my team that I founded, Team Dignitas, to the Harris Blitzer organization 2016. Left them last summer and joined Red Global as Chief Gaming Officer. And Red Global has brands as London Royal Ravens and Rogue. So my job is to look after all the teams and players, managers, coaches, and make sure they've got everything they need to go and win tournaments.
Great. Thanks, Odie. Ralph, are you back with us? No. Ralph.
Yeah, should be.
You're killing me.
Ralph. What's happened?
Ralph is quite a technical person, so we'll let him. Ralph will sort that out.
I'm going to. Okay, whilst Ralph, hang on, Ralph. Can we hear you, Ralph? No, something changed from when you got up and walked to the door. He's going to come back.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The power of the internet. Right, Andy, over to you.
Okay. Well, look, the question was going to be for Ralph and Odie to start with, which was now it's going to be just to Odie because here comes Ralph again. Just everyone, just hold on a second. We'll be live from Cologne, Germany. Here he comes. I wonder if we can hear you, Ralph. Can we hear you? Nope, we can't hear you yet. There's something weird. We don't know what it is. This is a first.
This might be some swearing in German happening right now that we can't.
Yeah, it could be. Something really weird.
Now,
yes,
now.
Here we go.
It was a cable not being fitting. So
well, that maybe when you got up and walked to the door, you pulled it.
Yeah.
So look,
always one for an entrance, Ralph. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Ralph. I used to be Spike's boss. That was a traumatic experience. I like esports, and I'm happy to be among those good people who are available today in that exact time slot.
Great, thanks, Ralph.
You are, of course, the founder.
I actually run ESL for quite some time, and used to be a player and still play video games.
Good to have you on board, Ralph. Good to hear you. And your English is better than mine, actually. I'm just going to ask first question really to Odie and Ralph as veterans, elder statespeople of the industry. I mean, esports is a wild ride at the best of times, and I think it's probably fair to say that the industry, much like the video games industry in general, it changes all the while there's a direction of travel, but it's crazy. What really keeps the two of you, wanting to do it, wanting to go back into battle every single day? What do you see the challenges? What's driving you?
Well, short answer, I'll start, Odie, if that's okay. So I don't know anything else. Long answer is, look, I mean, I came into it because I like competition. I like the idea to win and lose from a user perspective, from a player and from a fan perspective. When we started ESL, we wanted to build an infrastructure for the next generations of players to be celebrated as stars on those stages. And they can be digital stages, which are, more regular now, but there can be physical stages as well. And I think that excitement to see people win for something meaningful has totally not gone away. Same when I'm playing and I'm playing a semi-meaningless game on a Saturday night, is if I win, I get this goosebumps. Or when I'm in a stadium full of people and I see a team win in Cologne at ESL One Cologne, is that people that feeling you share with all the people physically on site, or nowadays if you watch it on the stream. So that has not changed, and I think we're pretty okay in doing that. There's actually not a lot of people who have built new sports on a serial entrepreneur basis. We as ESL doing that since 20 years. So as long as we can contribute to that, and as long as I know some of those tricks and not all of the others have learned them, I feel comfortable in doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, pretty much the same. I got into esports because I'm competitive. I got injured playing football. Found a game called Duke Nukem and then Quake 3. Was just absolutely hooked on beating everyone I could, if I could. And still today, when I transitioned from a player to a manager, coach, helping players go and win tournaments now is the drive for me. Obviously, the business side of it has completely changed from when I started my company in 2003. And now it's like mega millions of dollars involved. But it's also interesting for me to see how that works and how all of it's building now. And for me, like, it's still in its infancy, even 20 years in.
Cool.
No, great. And Anna, I guess question for you: when you were training to be a lawyer, did you envisage that you'd be running a top tier League of Legends team?
Well, I wish somebody had told me back then, that this is a career path I could take. All I saw myself actually is being, an academic or working at the European Commission. I'm quite into cartel law and, the technical side of it. So, which comes in handy, by the way, sometimes in esports. But I wish I would have known, because that would have motivated me quite a bit, I think. It was just not on the horizon back then. I always tell this to the kids, we nowadays work with. I'm like, you guys, can't remember how it was when the internet was just becoming a thing and you could start playing online, and the sense of community. This is just, for our esports players nowadays, they don't understand the wonders about this. So for me, it's actually fantastic that I now can work in that field. Yeah.
It's always seemed to me that, and Ralph, you probably will correct me, that there have been three major routes that have sort of coalesced to get us to the esports industry that we have today. Well, that's StarCraft in Korea and what they did with linear TV back in the day. The Americas with the console games like Call of Duty and Halo and what MLG did. And then Europe with sort of Warcraft and Counter-Strike and what you'd been doing for a long time, Ralph, as well. Obviously, I know, Quake played an important part in esports history, but would you agree that those are the three kind of major routes that got us to where we are as an industry today, or have I missed something? You're muted again, Ralph.
There's so many views on this, right? I don't think there's a right or wrong one. I have a more meta view than this. I think StarCraft, and if you look at it, StarCraft was so totally ahead of time and a unique coincidence. And I mean, Korea had such a big edge on the rest of the world in these early 2000s that it's a shame and a surprise that they ever lost it. But look, I always look about this on a different perspective, and this is just complementary to what you said. I always thought that everything until 2010 was a hobby, was based on vision, but there was no real business yet, at least in the Western world. Korea is that outlier, actually, but I would even argue for MLG in the US that there wasn't there yet. So what they did and what we did was really hard work. We had to do a lot of things we didn't want to do to do what we wanted to do. So it means our core business was probably service work. And why? Because the market was not there. really the market to make money with esports content. And after all, it's content, is the event, is the base for a content, really started in 2010. And why did that happen? It happened because the internet kind of became a commodity. Actually, video streaming on the internet became a thing with Twitch and YouTube Live. We had our own media to report about it, which is called social media. Don't forget, right? I mean, your Twitter and Facebook account will be 2008 Spike. So, 2 years before that. And most importantly, games business model changed to free to play. That means games became much more widely accessible. And all of those things together created a certain tipping point, a certain, growth, drive to scale. And that together made it a market. And ever since then, we've seen those non-endemic sponsors to actually invest strategically into esports. I mean, MLG and us we had lots of investment from traditional sponsors as well before, but that was very campaign driven, very short term, rarely in a long strategic way. But ever since then, we've been working with big partners, not from the gaming industry only, because it was relevant enough. Then media rights became a thing. And actually, even when you think about it, in 2013, ESL did their first stadium event. We did Katowice, and that was the first time actually when tickets became scale. So, even that revenue stream really was only built at that time and had the right size to do so. So that's why I always say in 2010, there was a market. So then we actually could build a business. And that took another 10 years, kind of. And now we're here. And now we're really feeling, and even in COVID times, that business on some of those revenue streams becomes scale. We've been doing incredibly well on media rights with traditional TV partners, actually. So that we've been talking about this forever, since 20 years now, but now that's starting to become reality. So it's fascinating. To leads to a different thing, everything takes longer than you think. No, but that's how I would look at it from a macro view rather than what you said. But both views are fine. I don't disagree with your one.
Yeah, and in Europe, obviously PC games have been very strong versus the UK, which has also been a bit of an outlier. OD consoles have been, from a sales perspective, have been pretty strong here as well. Do you think that, what I love about the UK is how well we over-index when it comes to on-screen talent, if you think about it. But players,
because you're English speaking, maybe.
Yeah,
but also we have a great creative industry. We have industries like the British Broadcasting Corporation. We have a history of training people for these sorts of roles as well. But Odie, from your perspective as starting as a player, 20 years ago, what have you seen the main kind of trajectory of esports has been?
To be honest, very similar to exactly what Ralph just said. So for the first kind of decade, it seemed like we were always chasing mainstream media, which even I got involved with DirecTV and Sky's effort in 2007, 2008, which felt good at the time, but it was horrible if you look back on it. It just completely ruined esports and the games that it was trying to portray. I enjoyed it, and they were paying me a lot of money, so that was cool. But still didn't get it, and that's what at the time it felt like that would be it. And then exactly 2010 when Twitch came along, for me and my team, that changed everything. That meant our audience just went through the roof. We had so many eyeballs on us. And then it's kind of switched now where mainstream media is kind of chasing esports, still trying to work out how to put it on TV to a commercial-led industry, but esports needs to be pure. Esports needs to be on TV as esports, and they have to fit everything else around that. And they're still working that out. I still haven't seen anything on mainstream, which is brilliant yet. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I've got a theory about mainstream, broadcast. Okay, if you look at the rise of Sky Sports in the UK and in a load of other territories as well, it's been very successful. The Premier League in the UK football was 1992. So it's been a while now, okay? And the Sky Sports team were young, principally male, massive football fans, okay? And those people are still the same people in the same jobs running Sky Sports, awarding the league and the teams huge amounts of money for the rights. but those people are now in their sort of 50s, mid-50s. They just don't understand esports at all. They don't understand the audience. They still stand by a subscriber model, you know, in terms of you've got to pay a monthly subscription. They don't understand free at all. And so I wonder if that whole sort of what we would call mainstream broadcasting media, it's kind of like no longer do we have to worry about those guys because we've got things like Twitch and even YouTube. I don't know what you think about that, Anna.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think certainly one thing we have, we see as a challenge, I believe, is the digital divide. I mean, basically what you're describing here is a societal transition from generations which have, not grown up with the digital world. They're not digital natives. So everything you describe in there is kind of new to them, not very natural. And then you have the younger generations, and for them, it's just absolutely normal to play video games online, to consume competitions in that industry online over the platforms you said. I still do believe that esports has this fantastic potential of being multi-generational, and just coming from the other side, basically the kids pulling in the parents. So I do believe, there is still a massive potential. We don't necessarily need it, I guess, but I do believe it would be actually a great thing to pull in all the generations. And I do believe it would be, the way to go would be over traditional broadcasting, just because it's not the way they consume. I don't think it's necessary. I also see Ralph, moving in his chair, so he probably has an opinion about that too.
No, I think the discussion, if it's needed or not, is just a wrong discussion. So I don't disagree with you on what you said. We've said with ESL a few years ago, we want ESL content to be on every screen in the world. So I think it's incredibly important, used to be until beginning of this year, to be in your in-flight entertainment system, that you can watch ESL content. I think that's a great idea. Is it a super important media channel to make esports successful? No. But look, I want people to be able to watch ESL content wherever they are, and that's always esports content. I think number one. I think number two, TV people actually sometimes do a good job in telling a story, a much better job than we do in our streamer chair. And if you look at what Formula One became, I think it's the best example of the power of storytelling. Because let's be honest, right? It's a terrible sport. I mean, you Spike will even like it because he was, I don't know, socialized with it. But it's the most idiocracy thing of, most super expensive car driving in a circle. I mean, you can't make this shit up. If you would ask someone to spend a lot of money to figure out what's the most boring sport to be invented, it's Formula One. It's right, on top of that podium. But what they did, and there's obviously some inspirational thing about the fastest cars in the world, but what they did in terms of a media product, what a Sky in the UK or an RTL in Germany broadcast a 2-hour show around a Formula One race, it's fantastic. They are doing an excellent job. And we pay attention to that. We learn about it every single day. And in Denmark, we have higher viewership numbers with our Counter-Strike tournaments than Champions League football games. And that's linear TV, right? Which is totally anti-logic. And Denmark is like the most digital country in the world with Korea and Sweden, right? We're not talking about a third world country. It's some countries in which don't have internet. So they're doing a good job in telling a story, probably a better job than ESL directly on their English stream for that local audience. And I believe that can be the case in markets. It doesn't have to be the case in markets, but can be. And what I want is ESL. I don't want to miss out on that opportunity to create more fans. I want to embrace that opportunity. But that doesn't mean it's the only opportunity. So I'm again back to where you are, Anna, right? It's not a necessity. It's an option. It's an opportunity. So let's go for it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think your point you make about the TV industry being amazing storytellers. There's no doubt about that.
Some of them, not all of them.
Not all of them, but but generally speaking, it's that curated content, it's that backstory, you know, it is that storytelling, which I think is not to be underestimating. And the human side is always the most important side. That's why people are interested in esports, because they're interested in obviously the games, because they're the games that they play and they love, but the players. And it's really, really important. That I think the TV industry has got a wealth of expertise, history, talent that can tell those stories really, really well, not exclusively.
I'd like to shift gear a little bit. Odie and Anna, you're now running teams, successful teams in franchise leagues. I'm sure we're all going to see more game publishers transition their games this year and next to franchise leagues. Can you give us a high-level sort of breakdown of the operational differences of running a team within a franchise versus running a team that's in an open sort of ecosystem or circuit? Odie, you probably have the best understanding of both.
Yeah, well, in a franchise, obviously working directly with the publisher, the developer, that's the biggest difference. And also in a franchise league, all the other teams are your partners. So there's opportunities to work with all of those teams to increase revenue and help the league grow and get bigger. In the past, before franchising, it was literally most teams against each other all the time, chasing the same sponsor money. So it kind of made it a lot easier in franchising, and franchising is what I've always predicted would happen because it just makes sense because the developers own their own games. But then you'll have some developers, obviously like Valve, for instance, who prefer the tournament organizers like ESL to run massive tournaments for them. And I think that will always happen. I think there's always going to be some developers that choose that route. For me personally, looking at the franchise stuff over sort of weighing it up to non-franchise, I prefer franchise leagues at the moment.
Cool.
Well, I think from a team's perspective, it's preferable to be in an ecosystem where you partner up more closely, whether this is now a franchise system or just, some type of alignment between you and the tournament organizer, or if the tournament organizer is the same as the game publisher, it might be even better sometimes. It really depends on the scenario. But generally, this alignment enables you to just maximize the potential of the revenue streams, I believe. It also allows you to really build up more hype and fandom around your product proactively together as partners. So, for example, us in the LSE, we work very closely on comms, content, what we're doing, the storytelling, and we don't have to worry, about other parties. There is just a really strong incentive to invest into creating fandom around the entire product, and then of course also selling the rights in a centralized way is also what I assume is really good for the revenue long term.
I mean, I just sort of segueing out into Ralph. ESL have been the leading light, I would argue, in the space for many, many years. You've created ESL 1, IEM. Those are ESL's properties. They're the big go-to events global events that fans love to go to, players love to play in. The real sort of theatre, I suppose. And you've been groundbreaking as a company in that space. Where do you see, let's say, the next 5 years or so, given that some publishers want to take control more of the vertical, let's say, than perhaps previously, but others won't. I mean, how do you see the next 5 years playing out? Big question, I know.
Yeah, no, I think it's an easy question, right? I think I think.
Try and ask some harder questions, Andy, will you, mate?
Yeah. No, I've had this question so many times, right? So
Try and think of a more original question, Andy, if you don't mind.
Going back. I mean, the answers, right? I mean, there's no way in the world that a team doesn't prefer a franchise system, right? Because basically it protects you to not be irrelevant. So it's the most easy answer in the world. And it's totally fine. And if I would be a top 16 team, I would totally love franchise. The only problem is if you're the 17th team, then you fucking hate franchise, right? And I've had this awesome conversation a few years ago in Lisbon, beautiful city. Web Summit, best conference in the world. We'll miss it this year, right? But it's the best place. And we're sitting on this beautiful beach. And I was sitting with, I don't know, the chief revenue officer of Benfica Lisbon. And he was explaining me how European football is doomed and how it doesn't make any sense and how it has to go franchise. And I was arguing against it. And we had fun and we were drinking. And then, after 2 hours of arguing on, factual levels, I said, okay, I buy it. You're right. Franchise is the best thing on the planet. I calculated this through, right? There's not going to be a Portuguese team in the European franchise of football, right? You're number 18, 19, maybe at best. Probably you're number 30. So you're out. And, you could see his disbelief in it, and you could see his realization. And he just couldn't grasp it. He didn't have a reply anymore, right? He was a well-spoken, smart guy. So, and that's going to be the same for me on, what do you think about publishers taking control of their esports? Obviously, I freaking think it's a terrible idea because I don't have a business then. So that is a very natural given answer. The question is, are you worried about them all doing it? No, because, the world is not built on vertical integration. Some people do vertical integration and some don't. In some market, it makes most sense and some less. There's a few key reasons. I first think still for the sport itself, for the fans and the players, an open ecosystem is usually better.
Yeah.
I actually don't know if I fully agree with what you said. The one thing you said, Anna, is that centralized sales of content is better than decentralized. And I'll tell you why. Because yes, on an existing pie, centralized sale of content will always give you better revenue, but it hinders you a lot to grow the pie. And we've been in esports, genuinely speaking, over the last 20 years, really focused on growing the pie. And I don't think we should forget that right now and, focus on getting a larger piece of that pie. It is very clear that teams need to get a revenue share from whatever tournaments are out there because a business model only based on sponsorship can't work on a scalable model. So that goes without saying, with or without a franchise model, with or without a tournament operator being independent or a publisher.
Yeah, and Ralph, that's my main point, by the way, because I think that's exactly, from a team perspective where we need to get in and make sure we get our piece of the pie, No,
and you need it's fully understand it. And there's no doubt about that for me as well, either. And, I'm a romantic there a little bit. I love that idea of relegation and promotion. I love that idea of change. I love that idea of inclusion. And that's the thing which I probably from a philosophical perspective, not so a business perspective, I'm still struggling with a franchise system. It's a system forever, right? It's set in stone forever. And I just believe, when we're living in a world where we have Black Lives Matters, and for me, it goes a little bit against that whole thought of the uprising from going from zero to hero. It just, and I might be wrong about it, but ultimately speaking, I'm not worried on that topic. I think there is space for so many different models in esports. We're growing that pie. We're in great shape as ESL, actually, despite the world we live in. And we're really bullish on the future and really bullish on many of those games.
But I think that's an interesting question.
And to be frank, Counter-Strike is the best game to watch out there. It's not, it's not the largest game in the world, but it's the best game to watch. It's actually, I would go even as far the best sport to watch that's out there overall. And I'm a big football fan, but watching a game of Counter-Strike is objectively a better experience for me.
You've never seen Takeshi's Castle, Ralph?
I funnily did very recently, so we can either take this offline or put this at the end of this. I did.
Wouldn't you say that's the best viewing experience in the world?
It's sportive. Sorry, this is entertainment. We're talking different categories now. No, but now you do rail me, which is fine. No, but long story short, both models will have plenty of chances to prove that they are good. And the world is not a monoculture, and that's good. But I'm not worried that all publishers go either way. And the industry we're in is about growing the pie, not so much fighting about which piece of the pie.
I think
I want to challenge Odie and Anna quickly. Where does that upstart come from? What incentivizes a franchise team that has a perpetual spot in the franchise to actually compete rather than prioritize social media followings or content, or having a player that's bad but very popular with the audience because he's the bad boy of the sport but performs very badly? What is there an incentive? What incentive is there for a poorly performing franchise team to improve?
I love this question because you know what? Losing sucks and it doesn't sell. And this is something super important in esports. You know, there are these people around in these discussions that love to ask me, hey, why don't you put together basically a good looking boy band and put them in front of the fans, and just market the hell out of them? And I will always tell them, because it doesn't work. This is not, our business model. This is not what people are interested in esports. They're interested in the competition. So if you don't perform, you will never be able to build your core fan base in esports. And on top of it, and you will just get a lot of hate, obviously, which is counterproductive to what you're trying to build as a brand. And of course, you're going to also have incentives by any franchise league out there. Believe me, that there's zero interest there, that there are teams that are just fully slacking, because it damages the product. The product needs to be as competitive as possible to be interesting to the fans.
Out of experience, relegation promotion helps a lot in ensuring that.
Oh, I agree. And one thing I wanted to add, and of course I like to challenge you a little bit here too, is that, this from zero to hero story. Yes, in a franchise system, you don't have it with teams anymore, but you certainly have it with players, coming up, growing up with, very young and then getting brought into the system. And I believe any franchise system that's going to succeed and be good also takes care of the path to pro. And for example, in Europe, just regional specifics, such as having territorialism, taking care of every country here in Europe. I think this is something Riot is trying to do successfully to a certain extent here in Europe. But still, of course, you will not have these stories in the LEC where, someone is getting kicked out because of relegation.
You're right. You're right, except for the math. So we actually spend a lot of time in looking into this. How many players come up in a franchise system? How many new players each season come to the top division? You can look at numbers like how many players have won money last year in Counter-Strike versus whatever other game. And I'm not even trying remotely to it on League of Legends because I think it's great and I watch it. So, but it's very clearly that the mass is very negative for franchise systems because the ways are limited. It's all more structured. It's more clear. It's more stable and static through that, which means it's less dynamic. So, right, everything positive has something negative with it. So it's just not true that the pass is the same, that the opportunity amount is the same. You could argue, but it's more stable, and I would not even disagree with that. But I'm more going for a wild ride and have the opportunity to go up, the American dream, than having this little bit top-down planned, communistic business system. I'm more this, capitalistic guy, and may the best one win, regardless of where it comes from. So,
but I have a question for you.
So for me, it's always been, and this is very philosophical, right? But it's been mind-blowing that the Americans, from being the dishwasher to become a millionaire, that land of all opportunities, has the most socialistic, communistic sports system in the whole planet. I just don't grasp it until today. I think that's, for me, the biggest riddle out there.
It's all about the money.
Or it might be an illusion. Or that American dream might be an illusion all along.
But the question is also, why do these numbers look like they do? I mean, obviously, you can argue it is because you don't have that much fluctuation in franchise systems just because people stick to their players. But maybe it's also just as an example in the LEC, for stability reasons, we have 2 trading windows during the year.
And every sport had that.
Of course, but this also, just leads to a system where you will not exchange that often a player just because it's a big risk, or, the biggest talents are simply not available because they're already locked in. Yeah. But in CSGO, as a contrast, which is, Weldem or chaotic open, you have a lot higher fluctuation just because you are right. There is more opportunity just because it is not as regulated. However, I still believe, at least in Europe, I don't think it's right for the LCS in America for different reasons. But in Europe, we do have a great path to pro with the regional leagues. We even have an academy team where there are great players on. Some of them play now.
But they could have so much better players. That's all I'm saying. I'm not hitting on League of Legends at all. That's not my intention. It's just there's and even if you look at the number of League of Legends player out there, the ratio gets worse, right? There's, 75 million people playing that game. How many of those can become pro? And how many have the chance? And that turnover is way too little. And the higher the chance is, the higher the chance for someone to come up, lowers the chance for someone to stay on top, right? It's a mathematical combination. But I like a world much more where I can tell my kid, you have that chance, and that's reasonable. Or a very aristocratic system where, just being there first and so means so much. But it's philosophical. I'm not, there's no right or wrong with this.
Well, I think there's some amazing points there. The beauty of esports, of course, unlike the world of sport, as we all know it, with esports, there's emerging games, new games all the time. So if effectively, there is no one size fits all. Franchising will work for certain publishers, IP owners, and it won't work for others. And I think that's the beauty. If you take the Premier League football yet again, the reason why it actually gets quite boring in the middle of the league, because they're not playing for anything. They're not fearing they're going to get relegated and they lose money and lose prestige, and they're not shooting for the European positions to qualify for the big stuff. So the stuff in the middle starts to get very stated. And I think, I'm just for the record, I'm all for open, because I think that just allows more talent in, more accessibility, more players coming into the pot. And it's a bit wilder. So I think, but the beauty is that we have got so many video games that are esports, and we are likely in the next 5 or 10 years to have even more. People who say to me, it's going to get less and less and much more competitive, I don't believe it at all, because games are being made now by incredibly talented developers, and the technology that people use to make games is much more available. Therefore, the community will decide.
I think let's keep on this sort of philosophical track for a second. Andy, you talk about all these new games that are being created all the time, and you and I, my whole professional career has been in the games industry, and I think so is yours. So on different angles, but what is it about the sort of the dominant games that we see today? The MOBAs, League of Legends and Dota, the FPSs, Counter-Strike, COD, Rainbow Six, and StarCraft, on the RTS side. And you could probably argue Battle Royale is starting to make a name for itself in the games there. But what is it about those specific game types that is so strong from a viewership and a participation perspective that has created the esports phenomenon?
Easy answer to that one. They're fun. That's pretty much it. If they're fun to watch, fun to play, they'll grow. That's my answer to that one. Fun.
But what about a game like a Quake, sort of a 1v1 shooter like that? Why has that not stood the test of time? Many people would argue that was fun, Odie.
Oh, it was fun. I was really good at it, and so was Ralph. And basically,
who was better?
That's a hard one, actually. I don't think we ever played against each other.
It's true.
We'll have to organise a rematch sometime, I think.
I don't know. It needs developer, publisher support. All games do to actually grow. And literally, you need people that want to play the games. With Quake, the learning curve on that game is hard. It's not easy. You jump into a server and you'll get ripped to bits by the players that have been playing for 20 years. Even I could be like, and somebody that's new to that game today, I hope that they wouldn't want to play it again. It's a really hard question, and it's probably a question that we've all been trying to answer for 20 years, and I don't think anybody's got the real answer to it yet. Counter-Strike was a mod when it appeared, and people just started playing it, and then it was fun to play, and more people played it. It's a real hard. I don't actually have the answer to that.
But why would something like Counter-Strike succeed where Day of Defeat failed? You know, I don't know, Ralph, if you've got any insight. You've probably worked with hundreds of games over your time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, and there's not one truth. There's, again, many different truths. But if you start with Quake, right? I mean, video game industry was a very different place back then. And actually, if you really think about it, or as far as I know, StarCraft and Quake were the first games you could even watch, right? Where there was even the technical solution to watch live. There was no video streaming back then. Don't forget that. There was this proxy called Quizmo or something like this that some dude programmed for Quake, so you could actually connect to a server, which then would stream the game going on. So that was super weird. And I think with StarCraft, there was nothing. That's why it became a linear phenomenon, because, I mean, there was no streaming even back then. Or you could watch replays. Actually, that was a way to do it. VODs, not live. So I think it starts there. I think both of those games, Quake and StarCraft, had the flaw that they were primarily one-on-one games. And I believe that sports, team games are usually much more longevity, create much more viewership effort. And if you look at the 10 biggest sports in the world, I think, I don't know, are all of them team sports? I don't have the number right in front of me, but I guess.
Golf, I would say, and golf.
Yeah, maybe golf and motorsports are not considered sport, right? Yeah. So don't worry. Yeah, but tennis is not top 10. Tennis, it's really small. Anyway, so right, there is a thing to teams, which makes sense because it's more generational in the mean that, you know, when Boris Becker retired in Germany, no one watched tennis anymore, right? Then when Nadal is gonna go down, no one in Spain is gonna watch it, and so on and so forth. So that fixed fandom is based around a person and not around a team. So that's a big value teams bring in, actually, that they make the more longevity of the sport. That was kind of number one. Number two, again, I think that Counter-Strike, why it's so long-lived, because you can translate what's going on. You can actually see when someone is doing something amazing. That translation from skill to viewership experience is pretty good in Counter-Strike. It's such a simple game. It's so obvious. And that's actually where most of the sports either fail or strive. Actually, with Battle Royale, it's pretty obvious too. It's actually why has Battle Royale been so successful as a viewership phenomenon? It's a few things. One of them is actually you see when someone does something amazing. You don't do that with many games, actually. With most games, you actually don't. Reason number two, why it has been so successful as a player experience, because actually playing competitive is really shitty because you win usually maximum 50% of your games. That means every second game you lose. Spike, how much do you like to lose? I know you well.
I'm a glutton for punishment, Ralph, but even I like to win sometimes.
So losing is really shit, right? It's a really shit experience. In Battle Royale, you don't even go in with the idea of winning because there's only one guy winning out of 100. It makes a huge psychological difference. And point number three, all of those things together made it the perfect place for people to entertain and to be more experimental, more entertaining, more having, you know, that next generation influencer kind of world. And that's probably the reason for me why it's so successful, this Battle Royale genre, compared to 20 years ago Quake, which was, you know, a very similar, different experience.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to follow up with a few last questions. We haven't talked much about the teams. I'd like to talk a little bit about teams. It seems, you know, every day there's new teams launching, teams that have raised gazillion dollars of funding, or, you know, announcing that they are raising money or looking for money. All of you have been in the business of teams at different parts in your career. Do you think the market for teams has started to consolidate, or is it still a open field of, that anyone with some that can set up a team tomorrow and build a brand around it?
I think yes, yeah, it's still completely open. Anybody can do that. The problem is nowadays to get to the level that anybody setting up a team now.
You just need $25 million if it's going to be
Yeah.
Call of Duty.
they need a lot of money. The thing that worries me the most is the smaller teams that are always going to be in the middle or down the bottom. It's really hard for those teams to get going and find out, to get their foot on the ladder and actually bring in some income. That's the bit that worries me, especially in the UK.
And Ralph, what about, obviously SK Gaming being one of the greatest teams of all time, being involved with it back in those days, how do you think that it's changed being, running a team or being part of the team back then and today?
I think it's hugely different, right? Those teams are so much more professional than they have been 10, 20 or 30 years ago. And that's an effect that you can see in any sport. To build the next Liverpool is infinitely harder now than it was 30 years ago. You need much more capital. You need much more ambition. So that's the one side of it. The other, it happens all the time. So Red Bull Leipzig, they've built a top 4 German team within the last 10 years. It's a pretty amazing story. All these American stories about, let's call it Moneyball, right? Where you just go in with a different approach, with a more sophisticated one that's called innovation. And innovation is good, and it's actually easier in an open ecosystem than in a closed one. That's just based on the theory about it. But I believe that the teams, and that's where I'm sympathetic with the whole thing, right? You need a defensible business model. If everything is always open and you do one mistake and you're dead, it sounds like a bad life. It sounds like a bad life choice. So I believe it's much harder to build a successful team now than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it's continuing to be that way. But I'm going to fight for a world where it's possible to build a team, where it's possible for someone to come in, and where the world is not ruled by an oligarch from 10, 20 years ago, like we see in some societies. I think our society should be different, and sports and esports should reflect that.
I think it's also a chance, how we're seeing now the entire industry growing and some teams consolidating, whether it's business-wise or from a scientific perspective, how players are trained, etc. It's harder to catch up. But then on the other hand, I think it leaves more room for, let's say, for example, smaller teams to be more creative to make their business case. So here in Germany, I think we've seen, a scene growing where you have these smaller or mid-sized teams that are concentrated more on the national market, maybe more local in terms of what they're building, more community driven in terms of being actually localized. I think these are all, also quite interesting developments.
Good. I've got one more question, which is a bit of a curveball, so don't answer if you don't want to. But education, okay, and there's a bunch of, obviously the education industry globally is a big thing, but there's a whole bunch of action going around esports focused, degree levels, various qualifications. Well, what's your view on that? Is that something that can be formalized, put in a bottle and taught?
I don't even understand the question here, Andy. So, what are you suggesting is there a degree in esports? It sounds like, is there a degree in sport?
Is there a degree in life?
Yeah, exactly, right? It's so broad, right? Esports is it's all disciplines together. Is there a degree in League of Legends or in Dota or in Counter-Strike? Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that answer, because that feeds into what, where I sort of came from originally, which was there was lots of educational establishments focusing on video game, making video games and things like that, and some really good courses. Okay, but it's taken a very long time to get some really good courses together. If education is free to take part in, a lot of this stuff falls away because the market eventually makes its decision. But when it's paid for, there's an awful lot of money to be made by selling kids courses that they believe will give them entry into an industry. And right now there are globally a number of courses. So the question specifically is, would you welcome, as an industry, formalized training across all the disciplines required in the esports ecosystem? Or, you know, do you want to shape that, welcome it, or reject it?
I have a very clear answer on this. We welcome it. I was actually involved in founding the Esports Player Foundation in Germany. It's doing exactly that. It's actually, the guy who runs it used to run the Sports Foundation in Germany, which basically gets money a little bit from the state, mostly from private companies, and invests it in kind of stipendias for talented players. It's one element of what Anna was talking about generally, right? There needs to be that path to pro. There needs to be different teams are helping a lot, but teams can't take all the burden.
Yeah.
So there should be some independent, overall industry and government financed institution to do that. We have that in Germany. I actually supported it with ESL directly to get it off the ground. It's now part of the Game Federation, so kind of the industry body. UK, you know that very well, right?
Yeah.
We ran it for many years, so we did that. And the answer is, goes back to the very beginning of this discussion we had. Let's create a world where everybody can be somebody, where a player has multiple chances to become from a fan to become a pro. And let's create as many different ways to get in there. And let's keep the world an open world where our kids have opportunities and not are limited.
I mean, one point I want to make, because I think, Andy, what you said, I guess where you're getting at is that there might be a problem with the quality of some courses that are out there. Are they really, you know, giving you the skills, you know, to succeed professionally? So I believe it is important that we have specialized courses. One thing you see, for example, in football, you know, the older an industry gets, there are quite, there are good courses with a good reputation. Why? Usually, yes, there is good education, but there is also a network behind where you basically get an entry point into an industry that is otherwise quite hard. And you're usually paying for that in that type of surrounding. And I think it might be also helpful in esports if you want to go down that route. Now, when it comes to the skills themselves, it might be helpful to teach them, but for example, and probably everybody will agree here, in the position of being an employer, yes, you need someone who understands what we're doing, who is, it's incredibly important to us that people are passionate about esports and they have some good ground knowledge. But then, you know, it's also really important for us, obviously, when we're someone employing us, let's say accountant and whatnot, that they, you know, that they mostly know about this field of the business. And I don't believe you need, you know, to learn esports accounting, for example, to be a brilliant accountant in Rogue.
I think one of the things to add, you know, obviously I'm actually probably a little bit more skeptical of a lot of these courses that are springing up, you know, teaching esports to people. But I think across academia in general, we're seeing you know, I think you can do a Kanye West degree at some university, but, you know, there is a dilution of academia in general happening. What I would like to see is if there is a way that esports and games can be used to incentivize people to learn. So if you're doing a legal module and one of the, you know, the way that an exercise is characterized is you'll have a player from your esports team who's negotiating with an organization, or I don't know, or maybe someone who's doing maths using basic, you know, Counter-Strike economy to teach mathematics to kids who are interested in Counter-Strike and at that level of maths. I think those are really cool tools that we can use to incentivize people to learn fundamentals. What I do worry about is people, instead of doing more traditional degrees, doing esports degrees. It's such an immature industry, and I can't imagine the teachers who are teaching those courses have really had the experience. I guess it's the old adage, right? Those that can do, those that can't teach. But, you know,
I agree with that adage, by the way, Spike.
Would be actually imparting knowledge. It's such an industry where actually the knowledge itself is still not fundamental.
Yeah.
So what is
I
your
think-
alternative plan there, Spike? So what are you suggesting? Because you're suggesting to do nothing. That's at least what I hear.
What I'm suggesting is that we should use the
Ralph,
tools.
Ralph, it's learning geography and history.
We should use the tools and the fun and the excitement of esports to frame more traditional modules in university or college level education.
So how does someone learn to run esports then? How do you want to build that next generation of managers
Well,
and
how did you learn
entrepreneurs?
how to do it, Ralph? How did you know?
Well,
My
you can't-
limited knowledge.
look,
I'm not totally useless at esports, but I've managed to do one or two things right. You know.
Well, but actually, we fought through a world which was inaccessible, and there's a certain type of people who can do that. But it's unfair to assume that the rest of the world can do that too.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, Ralph, because I think there's a bunch of really good experience, skills, tips, etc. Just a minute, Spike. There's a bunch of stuff that people have learned the hard way that they could pass on and make it easier for others who come after them to really accelerate the sport, the whole ecosystem, and build the economy. I think it's about spreading knowledge.
Yes.
I think these courses are
Well, it's
important.
exactly
Spike's
what
an
we're doing this
elitist who
afternoon.
wants to hinder people.
Why would I set this stream up on a Friday afternoon, Ralph? It's for people who want to get into the esports industry to learn from the greats, such as yourself, Ralph,
Don't call Spike.
Odie, and Anna. But we'll edit that bit out, I think. Anyway,
It's like-
You know, sometimes quality control matters in education quite a bit. And I think what we now see is that traditional academia has been a bit slower on esports, but at least in Germany and in the UK, I think there are, now new institutions being built involving academics from, for example, in law, we have an institute now in Augsburg, I believe. And they're researching esports law, going into all the specifics around the employment specifics and so on. And of course, they're, doing great work. They're laying the scientific foundations. I don't need to think so much on my own anymore when it comes to legal matters. It's quite helpful. I do believe this is also a great path forward where traditional academia opens up. Nonetheless, I believe for everybody who's watching and who's interested in such a degree that, it's quite hard to judge new courses, whether they really will bring you what you're looking for. And the only thing I can recommend is maybe even wait a little bit and see how the first absolvents of these courses are doing, if they're finding jobs, if they're, getting into places where somebody who's aspiring to do that might want to end up too.
And my argument on that would be they are certainly not going to be dumber than before they started to do this. So it's the same argument that more content is better than less content. It's
I agree with that.
it's opportunities. Why the hell would you be so elitist to remove opportunities, even only if they're
No,
say
it's just
I'm
very
elitist,
expensive.
Joe,
It's just some of these courses are very expensive, Ralph, and this is why I'm saying this. This is not being elitist. This is being a bit protective of someone who's super young and naive, and just saying like, really make sure what you're looking at will actually give you. This is just cost reward analysis here.
Sure.
Yeah, that is my only point.
I was hitting at Spike, not at you, just to be clear.
Don't worry, Anna. You're free.
Just to blend a bit of both here, a bit of Ralph and Spike, if I may. What's interesting is the British Esports Association, we've worked with Pearson, massive education specialist, to do what's called a BTEC, which is a sort of lower than university around esports. And the key thing in that piece of work that students will take on board, hopefully from September, if the world comes back together again, the key thing is that they're going to learn specifics around esports, but, and here's the but, Spike, those skills that they learn, it's almost like an incentive, a gateway, and those skills that they learn will be transferable, which I think is really important.
I love it.
So that's the kind of thing that I think you can use video games and esports as a fantastic incentive to teach people about video games and esports. However, if it doesn't work out for them, they've also learned a whole bunch of other stuff that could be useful in setting up a festival or setting up, a shop or something. I don't know, whatever it may be.
Fantastic. Just before we go, quick question for everybody. Odie, I know that you've been racking up the wins in Warzone. Either that or you're very good at reposting the same screenshot over and over again. What are you all playing at the moment, Odie?
Oh, Warzone, absolutely addicted. I love Battle Royale. It's such a an annoying genre to play because you can't always win.
Ralph, Clash Royale still?
Clash Royale, Dota 2, nothing has changed. And I actually installed a game today, which I stumbled across, so I'm gonna do some advertisement. It's called The Hunter Call of the Wild. It's a bargain on Steam right now. It's a single player game which teaches you hunting.
Great. And Anna, what about you?
Well, I'm in love with League of Legends. It's always been like that. My husband actually plays too. So we usually do a queue together. And when we do a good play, there's going to be the fist bump because our desks are just, side by side. So it's what we do in our free evenings.
Great. Anna, Ralph, Odie, thank you so much for joining us. Incredible insight.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Guys, we are stopped. Thank you very much.